I've always wanted to read more C.S. Lewis, and always felt like I should have read more, because really C.S. Lewis is one of the Christian literary giants of the last 100 years. And again, he's most well known if you're here for the very first week of our series. You can go back and listen to the first two parts. But he was not a theologian, not a preacher. He actually was a professor of English literature. Most people know him more recently is in the Chronicles of Narnia movies. He, of course, was the author of that children's series. And in this whole idea, first week, 2 weeks ago, again, it's on the podcast, we talked about mere Christianity, which was absolutely crucial. It's his story and his reasons from becoming and moving from being a committed atheist to being a committed Christian. And that was really behind the book Mere Christianity 2 weeks ago. Last week, I spoke about a book called The Great Divorce. And this was C.S. Lewis's thoughts regarding hell. And he really flips upside down the idea that a loving God sends people to hell. And he actually talks about how hell is locked from the inside, the freely chosen destination of its inhabitants. And if you want more about that, you can listen to the podcast, or even better, read the book, The Great Divorce. Today, we raise another book, very different kind of book, called Screwtape Letters. And this book asks a really strange question in this book, Screwtape Letters. What if you could listen in on a conversation between two demons? And they're talking about how to derail a young Christian's journey, or how to at least render that young Christian ineffective. And you go, okay, whoa. Okay, stop right here, Vern. Demons? What is the biblical background of this topic? Is this even a biblical idea? And so let me just give a little bit of biblical background before I introduce the book, because where does this whole idea of demons come? First of all, scriptures talk about angels. For example, Hebrews 1:14 says this: "Are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation?" So angels actually minister to us. I'm guessing there's angels here today, right? And they work on God's behalf for our good. Now, let me just say this. Primarily, they work behind the scenes. We're not supposed to spend a lot of time focusing on them. In fact, scriptures warn us against people who worship angels. And some people forget that they're to be in the background. They're not to be focused on. Who is to be focused on? God. God is the one who we are to focus on. So that's on the positive side. But scriptures also talk about evil and the personification of evil in a being called Satan, or Lucifer, or the devil. And the Bible talks about how this being also is supported by angels, albeit fallen angels. So listen to what the Bible tells us in the book of Revelation. There was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels, that's the God side, fought against the dragon and his angels. And the dragon lost the battle, and he and his angels were forced out of heaven. So there's heavenly angels and fallen angels. This great dragon, the ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, the one deceiving the whole world, was thrown down to the earth with all of his angels, his fallen angels, his demonic angels. Again, we're not told much about demons. In fact, once again, they are working behind the scenes. Just as God's angels work on God's behalf to minister to us. Fallen angels or demons oppose God's purposes. They bring harm. They bring deception. They bring suffering. There is a demonic realm. We're given a few verses which give more insight. Here's an example where we get some insight into how the demonic realm works on earth. 1 Timothy 4:1 tells us this. Now the Holy Spirit tells us clearly that in the last times some will turn away from the true faith. They will follow deceptive spirits and teachings that come from where? From demons. I watched recently a YouTube video by an ex-Mormon on the Mormon Church. And if you know anything about the Mormon Church began when an angel appeared to Joseph Smith and gave him a brand new gospel on golden plates. And you go, that's interesting. Now, most of us won't experience that type of demonic visitation. That's something that blatant or obvious. Most of us will experience the work of spiritual forces against us in a more subtle way. So, if the enemy, and you'll see this in the book, if he can't keep us from following Jesus, maybe he can subtly work against us to cause us to give up on our faith, or at least sidetrack us enough so that we are effectively useless in being fruitful followers of Jesus. So once again, to summarize, fallen angels or demons, they tempt us, they teach us, they hate the work of God, and they do their best to thwart God's plans on this earth. That's the gist of it. This is all I'm going to go. That's the basis of C.S. Lewis's story. Now, one last thing that's worth saying. C.S. Lewis asked the question at the beginning, so then if that's the case, how much focus should we put on understanding the demonic realm? And he starts by giving this really clear sort of direction. Listen to this. There are two equal and opposite errors into which our race can fall about the devils. That means demons. One is to disbelieve their existing. Oh, this whole demonic stuff, I don't buy any of it. That's one error. The other error is to believe and have an unhealthy interest in them. You know, I've seen people who have entire teachings around angelic beings or demonic beings, and they go to give special insight. And in one sense, we'll get to this in a minute, they draw our focus away from Jesus to the wild, the mysterious, the sensational, right? Just this last week, the top podcaster in the world, Joe Rogan, had a discussion with the Vice President of the United States as to whether or not UFOs are demonic or not. That's this week. And anything that, it's because it's like, wow, that's really sensational. That's news that's catching, right? And the idea is that we're drawn towards something which is sensational. So we can be drawn in an unhealthy way. But we also can underfocus and just say, well, if I don't want to learn about that, I don't want to know about that, right? And pretend that we live in a two-dimensional world, us and God. But remember, out of Mere Christianity, I said one of the things that C.S. Lewis says is, no. We live in a three-dimensional world. There's us, there's God, and then there's an evil realm around us. In fact, we are told these verses, 1 Peter 5:8. Stay alert. Watch out for your enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Stay alert. That's healthy. 2 Corinthians 2, I don't have it up there, but it says, don't let Satan outsmart you, for we are familiar with his evil schemes. And I'm going to give you through this book some of the schemes of the enemy that he plays against you this morning. And you prayed it this morning, Ron, when we were praying in pre-service prayer. We just had this great series on the book of Ephesians. And if you know the book of Ephesians, it ended with this whole passage on spiritual warfare. And we were told in Ephesians 6:11, what? Put on all of God's armor so that you will be able to stand firm against all of the strategies and plans of the devil. So, that's the background for this book. We don't have an unhealthy interest in them, but we are aware of his schemes and we want to understand, how does it mean to stay strong? How do we use spiritual warfare in the evil times that we live in? So in the book, you have two demons. Just setting it up here. You have an older demon, named Screwtape. Screwtape letters. It's the letters he's writing. He's the higher up, and he acts as kind of an uncle or mentor of the junior demon, who's the rookie called Wormwood, right? He calls him his nephew. And he talks Wormwood as the junior demon, and the older demon is helping the younger demon understand what's the most effective way to ply his trade against this Christian. So, first of all, the book starts, things have not gone well for the demons. The young guy that Wormwood was responsible has become a Christian. Listen to what Screwtape says. My dear Wormwood, I note with grave displeasure that your patient has become a Christian. Do not indulge the hope that you will escape the usual penalties. In the meantime, we must make the best of the situation. There is no need to despair. Hundreds of these adult converts have been reclaimed after a brief sojourn in the enemy's camp and are now with us. So it's like plan A didn't work out, so now we need to go for plan B. Time to switch our strategies. Okay, one last point. This book was written in the 1940s. That's 60 plus years ago. And some of the context is going to seem a little foreign to us. I will do my best to bring it up to 2026 and bring in examples of stories that I think make this more relevant, right? So, what strategies does the enemy use against us that these conversations between these two demons reveal? So, here we go. Brand new Christian walks off Wellington Street into church for the first time. What's the very first strategy? Here it is. Number one, a focus on the hypocrisy of others. Let me read from Screwtape letters regarding how to work with this young believer. One of our great allies at the present is the church itself. When he gets to the pew, we don't have pews, but the seats, he looks around him that the selection of his neighbors, these are the neighbors who he has previously avoided. You want to lean pretty heavily on those neighbors, provided that any of those neighbors sing out of tune, or have boots that squeak, or double chins, or odd clothes. The patient will quite easily believe that their religion must therefore be somehow ridiculous. Work hard then on the disappointment or anticlimax, which is certainly coming to the patient during his first few weeks as a churchman. In other words, he walks into this church building and looks around and goes, well, these people aren't cool at all. They're weird. They're odd. I don't think I'd normally hang around with these kind of people. Wow. What have I gotten myself into? Right? That's the very first thing. Start with that. But this is an even better strategy. This will really help your case, demons, if you get them to notice this. Here we go. I have been writing hitherto, I love that word, hitherto, on the assumption that the people in the next pew offer no rational grounds for this disappointment. They just look weird or act weird. Of course, if they do, If the patient knows the woman with the absurd hat is actually a fanatical bridge player, okay, no, nothing about bridge here, or the man with the squeaky boots, is a miser and an extortioner, then your task is so much easier. It's one thing to be hanging out with people who are weird or odd or uncool. But what if the people that you look around are not living up to the ideals that you thought Christians were going to live up to? So look around you. Right now, everyone look around you. Some of you, you're getting to know these people. You start hanging, start having coffee with them, start meeting, start talking to them at a break, and you start looking around and go, hey, I know you. You say you're a Christian, but I've heard stories about you. You're not living up to the faith that I thought Christians were supposed to, right? What's the favorite word of this strategy? Hypocrite. This church is full of hypocrites. And you know what? It's true. None of us are not hypocrites at some level. All of us are recovering hypocrites, right? It's why Jesus said, stop looking at other people's faults that you have 20/20 vision on. Start dealing with your own issues. So the enemy, his very first strategy is to get you, and he'll be really good at it, pointing out all the little hypocrisies of the people around you. It's a great strategy, right? How many people do you know who've talked about the hypocrites in church? Right? That's the first strategy. Great opening strategy. Number 2, this is an interesting one. Focus on the changing feelings of believers. Now, he raises a word here. I'd never heard it before, called undulation. And undulation is the natural highs and lows of human life. Sometimes we're up, sometimes we're down. Sometimes we feel this, sometimes we feel that. And what he talks about is this. If you watched your patient carefully, you would have seen this undulation in every part of his life. You want to put that phrase up, that quote up? Yeah. His interest in his work comes and goes. His affection for his friends rises and falls. His physical appetites all go up and down. As long as he lives on earth, periods of emotional and bodily richness and liveliness will alternate with periods of numbness and poverty. Any of you experience that? Just the rise and falls of your faith, the rise and falls of how you feel, your emotions, your relationships, right? So Screwtape says, let's get that to work for our advantage. Take this new believer. Sometimes he's up, sometimes he's down. Okay, let's work on him. Let's use that human reality to our advantage. And this is what he says. To decide what the best use is, you must ask what use the enemy wants to make it, and then do the opposite. Now, it may surprise you to learn that in his efforts to get permanent possession of a soul, he relies on the troughs, that's the down moments, even more than the mountaintop, the peaks. Some of his special favorites have gone through longer and deeper valleys or troughs than anyone else. The prayers offered in the state of dryness are those which please him the best. Right? So get this young believer to think when he can't feel God, when God doesn't seem close, tell him that's because God isn't close. God doesn't care about you. God has abandoned you. Whisper that in his ear. Do that. As Screwtape puts it, our cause is never more in danger than when a human looks around the universe from which every trace of God seems to have vanished and asks why he has been forsaken, yet still obeys. That good? Amen. That is the strategy of the enemy. Here's the next one. This one you're going, boy, this sounds so much like 2026, not necessarily 40s. A focus on novelty. So in the dryness and ups and downs of our normal life, We're all tempted to look for something new instead of just seeking, following, and obeying God. We're tempted to be drawn towards novelty. Listen to this passage. What we want, if men become Christians at all, is to keep them in a state of mind I call Christianity and faith healing. Christianity and vegetarianism. Okay? Christianity and spelling reform. I'm glad we spelled out heart, H-E-A-R-T. We were all learning to spell, right? Work on their horror of the same old thing. The horror of the same old thing is one of the most valuable passions we have produced in the human heart. An endless source of heresies in religion, infidelity in marriage, and inconstancy in friendship. Novelty. Need something new, something exciting. And I meet people, over the years, I've met lots of people for the first time. And it's pretty easy within 1, 2, 3 minutes of talking to them. What are they most excited about? What are they most passionate about? What bone are they chewing? Is it Jesus? Or is it Jesus and Christianity and end-time theology? Christianity and revival? Christianity and miracles, Christianity and prophecy, Christianity and the King James Bible, Christianity and women's role in ministry. Christianity, there's something. Is it Christianity and, or is it Jesus? And oftentimes, people have their pet version of Christianity. They spend all day, they're reading, they're online, petting their version of Christianity and then they come to me and they want me to, can you please pet that too? And I go, well, not really, because that's not I'm trying to be Jesus-focused, right? Anything which gets your eyes off Jesus works just fine. Novelty, right? Do we deal with that today? Absolutely. There's lots of things that we want to get, all excited about. Here's another one. You're going, does this sound like us or what? A focus on, you ready? A better church. This is really good. Screwtape says this. You mentioned casually in your last letter that the patient has continued to attend one church and one only since he was converted, and that he is not wholly pleased with it. Why have I no report on the causes of his fidelity to the parish church? Do you realize that unless it is due to indifference, it is a very bad thing that he is connected? Surely you know that if a man can be cured of surely you know that if a man can't be cured of church going, the next best thing is to send him all over the neighborhood looking for the church that suits him until he becomes a taster or connoisseur of churches. The search for a suitable church makes the man a critic when the enemy wants him to be what? A pupil, a learner, a student. And that has no relevance for today, right? Yeah, right. I remember talking to a guy, and I was tutoring his son, and I said, hey, he had a lot of God talk. He says, where do you go to church? He says, we go to church in Seattle. I says, Seattle? He says, yeah, that's the only church which is preaching the Bible. We go to Mark Driscoll's church. That's the only one. That's the only church which is accurately preaching the word. Really? So we pack up all kids and drive 3 hours to Seattle because that's the only biblical church out there. Wow. Unbelievable. I didn't know that. But he had become such a fine connoisseur of churches that there was only one that he could go to and take his family to. Now, that's an extreme example. And one of the phrases I've used to be charitable and generous, I've probably been too charitable and too generous, is when people talk about switching churches or going different places, I've given this phrase, you know what? It takes lots of types of churches to reach lots of types of people. And I still believe that. But I probably should have added something else. But you also know, at some point, every church will chafe you will irritate you, will bug you. And more likely than not, it's God working on you. And the temptation is whenever the heat starts getting a little too hot, the temptation is just to move on and just get out of the heat, get out of the kitchen, so to speak, right? So there you go. Any of that have any relevance for today? Written in the 1940s? Okay, strap yourself in. Everyone put their seatbelt on. Okay, because I'm going to bring one up now. It's going to cause a little bit of reaction. I have focused on divisive human concerns. In chapter 7, Screwtape deals with what was, and it was a huge issue, the hottest political and divisive issue in the church. It was an issue that believers did not see eye to eye on, and they were in considerable tension over. And it was the question, should you be a patriot and join the war effort, or should you be a pacifist and stand on the sidelines? Now, you got to remember, at this time, the Nazis were bombing England. So this had a little bit of heat to it. Would you say that? Should you be a patriot or the pacifist? And you're thinking, well, what's the right answer? Should a Christian fight against the Nazis or should they not fight against the Nazis? You're going, is there something that would get our blood to boil over? Which do you think the demons favored? What was the right answer for the demons? It might surprise you. Listen to this. We should make the patient an extreme patriot or an extreme pacifist. All extremes, except extreme devotion to the enemy, are to be encouraged. Whichever he adopts, your main task will be the same. Let him begin by treating the patriotism or the pacifism as part of his religion. Then let him, under the influence of a partisan spirit, come to regard it as the most important part. Wow. So what he's saying is, let's get this young Christian to fuse his politics to his faith. That's a great answer. Listen to this. Gradually nurse him onto the stage if you can, at which his religion becomes merely a part of his cause. Once you have made the world an end and his faith as a means to that end, you have almost won your man. Any of this sound familiar? Any divisive issues roll through the church these days? Let me bring up COVID. Well, that had a little bit of heat to it. Remember how divisive, now I think it's not too soon enough. Remember how divisive that was? 4 or 5 years ago? What was the biggest strategy using, even COVID isn't on the same level, I don't think, of pacifism or patriotism, but for people it might have been. What was the biggest strategy of the enemy during the COVID crisis? I'll give you a couple examples. Was it to keep the church open or to shut the church down? Was that his biggest? What was it, to get people to take the mRNA vaccine or to keep people from taking the mRNA vaccine? Which was it? Well, here is the biggest strategy of the enemy. Some of you, I know you got your seatbelts on, right? It was this. It was to cause arguments and divisions between Christians about whether or not to shut down services or take the vaccine. That was his biggest strategy, not which one you chose. His biggest strategy was to make that the divisive issue, to make us partisan, to get us to butt heads against each other, right? Extreme of anything would work for him. I mean, I know Christians who still haven't come back to church since COVID because the church never nuanced it the right way. So, the strategy of the enemy is to make us a religious or political crusader or a culture warrior. When I talk to culture warriors, you have to get on our side of fighting against this or that or this. That's what Christians do, fuse everything together. Make this the most important issue. Make this Christianity and. And then what happens, here's the big question I ask Christians. Can you hang out with somebody who is completely on the opposite of that issue and still love them, still fellowship with them? It's a pretty good indication how important that issue has come to you. All right, you can take your seatbelt off. The next one, using the power of, here's the word, drift. One of the biggest tools of the enemy is drift. It's so effective because it's so subtle and gradual. And this is how screwtape talks about this with wormwood. Like all young tempters, that's wormwood, you were anxious to be able to report spectacular wickedness. Oh, you couldn't believe what I got my guy to do, right? But do remember, the only thing that matters is the extent to which you separate the man from the enemy God, of course. It does not matter how small the sins are, provided that their cumulative effort is to edge the man away from the light and out into the nothing. Murder is not better than cards if cards can do the trick. Indeed, the safest road to hell is the what? The gradual one, the gentle slope, the soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. And what he's saying is, people tend more often than not to move gradually away from God than they do to take a sudden turn away from God. And because I do have to put a couple scriptures in here, Hebrews 2:1 says this, so we must listen very carefully to the truth, we have heard, or we may what? Drift away from it. One of the biggest and hardest challenges as a pastor for 30 years was trying to point out somebody's drift. Well, who do you think you are? How dare you? Right? It's also one of the reasons why community is so important. You're with a group of people for a period of time. You get to know each other. You build up some trust. And oftentimes people didn't have the equity of me. I was just a pastor. But you're out with somebody and they start saying some weird stuff. You go, hey, dude, what are you reading? Because that doesn't sound like biblical, historical truth at all. Like, what books are you reading? Who are you following online? Or, girl, I see you're out for coffee with this guy. Like, is he good for you? Does your husband know? Like, what's going on here, right? You go, are you drifting? Like what's happening here? And in relationships, you can call somebody, and someone might say, well, I'm just, searching out my faith. I'm just asking questions. I'm just doing these things. Okay. But are you also aware of truth, and you're aware that we have a spiritual enemy? Community. Do you see the safety in community when our lives are open with one another? Otherwise, you're just on your own, drifting off into space for 100,000 light years, right? Without community. Okay, since this is my last week, I'm going to take liberties. I'm going to add one of the ones in my thing that C.S. Lewis should have added. Right? So here you go. This is the one that I think he should have added. And I'm going to call this fear of the enemy. And I've seen this played out lots of times in church. And it's something that actually comes out of an increased awareness of the enemy's strategies and how he wants to, tempt us or pull us away from God. So that's a good thing to know the enemy is alive and working, but it can sometimes go sideways. And this is why I think it can go sideways. This is how this fear of the enemy goes. If I step out for God, I am going to become a target of the enemy. I can't tell you how many times I heard that as a pastor. Well, you're a target of the enemy, you know. But if I step out, I'm going to become a target. My marriage, my kids, my health, my finances, whatever. I don't want to be a target. Better to stay in the background, mind my own business, keep out of the enemy's sight. Like that's where that goes, that fear goes. And let me ask you this. Who do you think would be most served by you stepping back from God's call for your life? God or the enemy? The enemy. He's bullied you. He's used fear to get you to do or get you not to do what God has called you to do. I'm not talking about presumption, doing whatever you think you should do. I'm talking about following God's call, specific call. And I want to say this. I'm going to say this a couple times. You need to hear this. There is no safer place to be than in the center of God's will. Yes, don't give the enemy a foothold in your life, but don't let him bully you into thinking that he is as powerful as God. God is our rock. God is our shield. God is our protector. God has won the victory. Say it again. There is no safer place to be than in the center of God's will. I want us to have us say that together. There is no safer place to be than in the center of God's will. And I'm going to end on this verse that I read in my quiet time this week. Listen to this. The wicked run away. Reminds me of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. The wicked run away when no one is chasing them. But the godly are as bold as lions. As long as we're following God, as long as we are doing what He's called us to do, we can be as bold as what? Lions. There you go. 3 books from C.S. Lewis. Encourage you to read them. Encourage you to think about them. This is what I want to pray. I want to pray specifically about fear. Fear is a huge tool of the enemy. And let's all stand up here, first of all. And there are some here that the enemy has used fear in a multiplicity of ways in your life. Some people, it may have been something early on which caused fear. And even when you go to sleep at night, fear grips you. Some of you saw something which brings you back to a place of fear. Some of you are just hesitant to step out because of fear. Maybe a past experience that didn't go the way you thought it would. So Lord, right now, you are a God who comes to heal us from fear. You are a protector. You are a Savior. You are a God that we can trust as our fortress, our shield. And I just want to invite you right now to give that fear to God, and you say, meet me in this place of fear. Because if you're living in fear, that's a place of absence where God is not there with you. And right now I ask God to come and be with you in that fear place. Lord, we love you. We thank you, as we sang this morning, that you are faithful. You do great things in our lives. We look to you this week. In Jesus' name, amen.